Imagine you are on a ship, bound for the Arctic from Greenland in a summer in the mid-1800s. There's a goal to the expedition. You're supposed to fill in the gaps of the maps that currently exist to learn more about the Arctic. But before fall can even hit, one of the two ships that you are traveling with runs aground. There's no hope of getting it out of the ice. It's barely fall. You're so far out into the unknown that you can't possibly get help anywhere close by. And the other ship doesn't stand a good chance of getting out either, of finding help. And even if you traveled on foot, there's a lot of unknown barren expanse to travel. A lot of crew members, not enough supplies, and just no good equipment to be able to get you to where you need to go. As days turn into weeks, sometimes even months, you wonder if anyone is going to remember you, or if they might ever find your body. And that is basically what happens during the Franklin expedition. Now, I don't know too much about the Franklin expedition. I know bits and pieces here or there. I know the general synopsis of what happens, and I know tidbits of the details, but this is one of those events that I haven't researched fully, but I would definitely like to know more because these kinds of things are right up my alley. What up guys, Otterpop here. I have been recommended to watch some of Wendigoon's videos because I have also watched Lemmino's videos. Fantastic storyteller and animator, by the way, Lemmino is. I mean, I've watched his Dyatlov Pass episode, his Jack the Ripper episode, which is probably my favorite of his videos that I've watched so far, and of course the JFK assassination. Because here's the fun part. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in forensic science. I am thoroughly interested by forensics and cold cases and mysteries and whatnot. I love that stuff. True mysteries, not necessarily fictional ones. Fictional ones can be interesting, but I prefer the, true crime and true mystery kind of stuff. But I have been recommended Wendigoon's videos, and I'm actually not entirely surprised because from what I've seen from some of Wendigoon's content, it actually seems a little bit similar to the content of another creator that I actually am very familiar with and love the videos of, named Scary Interesting. There's also another called, oh shoot, I'm suddenly forgetting. Hold on. Tragedy Tales. That's it. I like Tragedy Tales, but I really love Scary Interesting's videos. I've watched, I don't even know how many of his videos I've watched, but he is a fantastic storyteller. I love the stories that he tells, and I can be in any kind of mood, and I would be fine to watch those videos. Because to some people they may be frightening, but to somebody like me, they're really not. They're fascinating, and they are kind of cautionary tales in their own way. I mean, as are, it seems like, Wendigoon's videos. I may have watched a video or two of Wendigoon's in the past, but I can't exactly remember for sure, but I definitely have not seen this one. It was recommended that I watch Wendigoon's video on the Lost Franklin expedition, which, as I said earlier, I know little bits and pieces of. I don't necessarily know the whole story. This is one of those kinds of events that I haven't really gone too much into researching. So I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about the details and see if I can't provide some of my own forensic, scientific, historical insights, because this kind of stuff genuinely fascinates me. I love stuff like this, and I would love to watch more of this. And if you want me to watch more, you absolutely can. Like, let me know some of these kinds of these channels and these episodes and whatnot. I love to watch stuff like this. Or, if you want to make sure that I most definitely watch it, you can also head to my Patreon real quick. There are so many tiers where you get access to so many different things, and I know it sounds like you've probably heard this from every other creator, but trust me. Because remember, I am a YouTuber, I'm an artist, and I am a writer, and I provide a bunch of different kinds of content, from drawing my wolf comic, to providing reactions on scientific material, to playing a bunch of games with either myself, playing a game with myself, sure, that sounds normal, or with my sister or fellow community members. I really do have a variety in content, and there are a couple tiers on Patreon where you're able to request projects of me. You can ask me to watch a specific video or play a specific game. There are some limitations to that, obviously, because if everybody started requesting whatever they wanted, I'd have way too many projects on my hands and could never do what I wanted personally, but, you know. On the flip side, I do also now have YouTube memberships. They're pretty simple. You can either get some early access to basically any video that I post, might get some members-only live streams, and of course, you might get exclusive access to material that the public won't necessarily see, so there's something to think about as well. The YouTube membership thing is a little bit newer, you know, for people who didn't necessarily want to go off-platform, but the Patreon stuff offers a lot more, I guarantee you. Let's get right into Wendigoon's video on the Lost Franklin expedition. And keep in mind, because I am the kind of creator that I am, I try and provide a lot of commentary, so I might be pausing a lot in this. And if that's not the kind of reaction or commentary or analysis you're looking for, just go to somebody else's channel, alright? Like, I'm here to provide my own genuine interest and feedback. And I want that to be clear up front. So, I've been doing this introduction for long enough. Let's go ahead and get right into it.
Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about the story of one of the doomed voyages in humanity's twilight days of exploration, and that is the failed journey of the Franklin expedition and its ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. I've always loved this story
What a
because
name,
it's one of
the
the
Terror.
last cases of adventure and exploration and serves as a testimony of what that adventure can lead to. Now this story may be familiar to you if you saw the AMC miniseries The Terror, which was about the Franklin expedition.
I did not see
However,
this. I did not know
took
that
a
it
few creative
existed.
liberties with the story, and I want to tell you about the
Oh.
true story, or at least the story that was pieced together by the evidence I'm going to talk about.
Okay, so I didn't even realize that there was an AMC series. So, as in... Hold up. So is it like a semi-biographical story? So wait, is it a documentary or is it like an actual retelling of events? Because there's a difference. Because, you know, he said creative liberties, so I'm willing to bet that it's kind of semi-fictional in nature instead of documentarial, like you would see with plenty of other things. Anyways, I don't really watch much stuff on the AMC network. You know, I have access to, you know, Disney Plus and Netflix and Hulu and HBO, but I don't know where the AMC stuff usually go. I think it might just kind of go all over the place, really, but I don't actually know much about that stuff. So that could be something to look into. And what a name, the HMS Terror. Like, imagine calling a mighty ship the Terror. Okay, let me clarify. Calling like a warship the Terror, that's one thing. Calling an exploration ship the Terror? That's a little amusing. Just a little bit. Especially considering what many sailors, you know, did when it came to exploring parts of the New World in the initial stages of exploring the New World. And another thing that I'm thinking about it, I think I vaguely remember hearing about this. Wasn't there some big revelation about this expedition in the last decade or so? It was that recent, because again, this occurred in the 1800s, but there have been discoveries as recent as the last decade. I think there was some kind of discovery, I just don't exactly remember what it was. I think I remember hearing about it though, but I don't remember what it was or when it was, but I'm pretty sure it was in the last decade.
Now, there's also been some other YouTubers who have done a fantastic job of covering this story as well, like History Buffs, who compared the real-life accounts to the accounts of the TV show, and Maritime Horrors, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite YouTube channels.
I don't know if I've watched their videos.
I'm going to include those videos down below, as well as some of the others that I really enjoy, but if you want to hear much better accounts and representations of those stories than whatever I can manage, check them out in the description.
Random interjection, real quick, I promise. I can't remember if Scary Interesting did a video on the Lost Franklin expedition or not. If so, it definitely was not this in-depth because his videos are usually anywhere from 18 to 25 minutes. It's pretty normal for him. But did he? Did he make a video about the Franklin expedition too? History Buffs, now that I say that, the name is sounding a little bit more familiar. Maritime Horrors I've definitely heard of. I don't think I've watched their videos though. Ow.
Two quick things before we get started. For one, I
just
am
two.
back to the Blue Yeti mic, as you can see, and I'm trying out a lot of different settings with my camera. I've heard you guys in the past
I've heard
videos
of
saying that
Yeti
the
mics.
lighting was weird and the audio was weird, and I'm really dumb to all this and trying to teach myself with YouTube videos. So
That's fair.
honestly, let me know how this looks and how it sounds, because I'm trying my best. And
You
also,
have a better
if you're
lighting
a
setup
patron,
than I
stick
do.
around to the
Do
end
you
of
see
the
how dim
video.
it is?
During the end credits, I want to
I don't have
make
good
one
lights.
last announcement for everything that I mentioned on the Patreon lately, so stay tuned for that. And for everyone else, hopefully you want to stick around as we talk about one of the final stories of humanity's desire to explore the Earth.
The unfortunate thing about my situation is that my YouTube setup, my video recording and editing setup is the same as my bedroom, so I can't really have any good lights. And I don't like the lights in there. I don't like them. So I don't use them. But going back to what he was saying about the Franklin expedition and being a part of like the twilight age of exploration and one of humanity's I can't even remember exactly what he said, but it was definitely one of the most tragic incidents that occurred in humanity's desire in general to explore and uncover secrets about this planet. There are still so many secrets that we don't know about. And by the time of the 1800s, a lot of the Americas had been explored. It hadn't been super well mapped, but the Arctic was one of those few exceptions because, during a very large portion of every single year, especially depending on the season, it can get exceptionally hard to navigate, especially with the kinds of ships that were being made at the time. Although by the time of the mid to late 1800s, advancements were being developed. I can't exactly remember what kinds of advancements, but I do remember that there were advancements being made in that time regarding maritime exploration. But there's so much ice and snow and unfavorable weather in the Arctic during a very large portion of every year. So trying to explore it was very difficult, which is why timing is often key when it comes to exploration missions like this. Was it favorable for the Franklin expedition by the time they actually set out? I don't know, I guess I'll find out.
But before we get into a story of adventure and excitement, let's talk about something that isn't exciting, and that's having your personal data stolen. But thanks to today's sponsor,
Here we go.
you'll never
We got
have to worry about that again with Atlas VPN.
Oh, not
Atlas
NordVPN,
is a
Atlas
fantastic
VPN.
digital tool that hides your location and keeps your information secure whenever you're browsing the internet.
Very nice.
Whenever you log on to one of Atlas's servers, your IP and DNS address are passed through their system before it's passed
I might as
on
well
to the
give
rest
him
of
this
the web.
plug since I'm
So if anyone tries
watching
to
this
search
video,
for
so
your
that's
information,
fine.
it will get jammed up
you
by
wanna skip,
Atlas's system and
you
you'll
can.
be
Not a
completely
big deal.
hidden. But on top of that, Atlas's user interface is very user-friendly and has a series of other tools that can also help you when browsing the web. Like, for example, Atlas has something called a data breach monitor, which if you've ever heard someone say that your email and password may be part of a hack or leak that's happened, you can go to Atlas VPN, put in your email address, and it will tell you if any of your information has fallen into the wrong hands. So rather than just being afraid all the time, if your information's out there on the web somewhere, you can go through Atlas and know for sure. Another cool feature about Atlas is you can use it to change your digital location. So for example, say that you want to watch something on Netflix, but the movie or show that you're looking for isn't available in your country. All you have to do is go to Atlas VPN and change your address to one of their servers in another country, and then whenever you go to Netflix and reload it, you will have their entire catalog for that country, meaning you can essentially stream the web from any part of the world you wish. Atlas VPN is also offered on all digital platforms, and they also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you can try it out, and if you don't like it, you can get your money back, although I'm sure you will. And right now, you can't go wrong, because if you go to Atlas's link in the description, you will be able to get their plan
82% off? That's so specific.
Off. That's right, if you go to the link in the description, you will be able to get everything I just mentioned, from the internet privacy, to the email protection, as well as the server location change, and much, much more for 82% off, or in other words, $1.99 a month, what's not to love?
Wow.
Thank you all so
Damn.
much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to Atlas for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. I hope you all enjoyed. Again, check them out in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. To really understand the importance of the Franklin expedition, there's a little bit of history that goes into it. See, for a really long time, Europe was trying to find some means of travel between themselves and Asia. Because if someone wanted to go from, say, England to China, it was a several-year expedition that made them loop all the way around the bottom of Africa because the Suez Canal had not yet been invented. However, once the Americas were discovered, people figured out that the globe was a bit bigger than they initially thought it was. So people at the time began speculating perhaps there is a path to Asia if one were to travel north. Specifically, north through the Arctic around the North Pole and down south into Asia. If this theory were true, it would save literally years of time during travel, as well as the lives of the people who died aboard ships making these long voyages. In the late 1700s, the Hudson Bay Company made several expeditions around the coast of Canada trying to find an inlet that they think could get them to pass across into Asia. At the time, no one really understood the westward to eastward expanse of the Americas, and people were kind of testing the shores to see if there was any breakage that they could drop south through. And in the 1800s, the Secretary of the Admiralty, which is basically England's Navy at the time, was determined that there was a passage near the North Pole. In 1845, Sir John Barrow was 82 years old, and at the end of his career, he was determined to commission the first travel from Europe to Asia through the North Pole. And so Barrow set about in finding the best captain for the job who could man such a dangerous
wasn't even
voyage.
the first pick.
The first two captains that he selected each turned him down because while both of them were very experienced with the Arctic, they have both sworn off ever traveling north again. See, traveling to the Arctic by ship at the time was not only an incredibly dangerous journey, but a terrifying one. Whenever it became winter near the North Pole, the oceans would begin to freeze on the several inlets that the ships would travel through. Or in other words, you could be sailing for a year and then be stuck for half a year as the water freezes around you, where you have to wait for it to thaw, and you continue sailing into the nothingness of ice and water. As I mentioned, in the decades leading up to this expedition, there were several other attempts to try to get through the Arctic Passage, and most of them ended with the ship turning around after about a year and a half, and even then with several of the crew members dying of either food poisoning or hypothermia or pneumonia and the other various diseases you could die of at the time, as well as many sailors reporting to have gone mad due to the isolation of the North Pole. Or technically northern Canada, not quite the North Pole, but I mean, like,
still technically the Arctic region,
like infinite ice. You couldn't tell the difference anyway. The third pick for the job was a sailor by the name of Francis Crozier. He had taken many trips to the Arctic, was well experienced, liked by the Admiralty, and was up for doing it again. It sounds like the perfect option. However, Crozier was Irish, and it was a big deal for the British government at the time that it needs to be a thoroughbred member of British royalty who makes the first expedition. The fourth pick for the option was a captain by the name of James Fitzjames.
He wasn't even the fourth pick.
And while he did fit the criteria of being of British upper class, he wasn't that experienced with sailing, especially not in the Arctic, so he was passed up as well. The man who would eventually lead this expedition was Barrow's fifth pick for the job, Captain John Franklin. John Franklin was of British upper class and a sort of celebrity amongst the sailors of the time.
That really tells you something, though. If you're an individual who is like a ship captain, but you had 4 other people who were ahead of you, and all of them turned it down or were turned down for other reasons. Like, the top 2 picks turned down the offer. Because they said, oh, I'm sorry, you want to send us where? No, thank you. No, I'm not going up there again. Because they really didn't know all that much about traveling to the Arctic in that time period. And even with some of the advancements that they might have had at the time, they still didn't have the best capabilities to be able to travel in those treacherous kinds of waters. Or ice sheets, rather. Or not even be able to travel at all for a significant portion of time. To know that Franklin was the 5th pick, though, that's already a red flag. I completely forgot what happened with the 4th. The first 2 turned it down. The 3rd, the British didn't want an Irishman. They wanted British nobility. Oh, wait, I think the 4th was Inexperienced. Maybe that was why. But if you're the 5th pick for an expedition like that, that should tell you something. That should set off all kinds of red flags.
He was incredibly kind to sailors
Celebrity
who
and
worked under
experienced are
him,
not the same thing.
and was also a religious leader who would regularly lead sermons and pray with the men aboard his ships. His wife, Lady Jane Franklin, was also a well-loved figure in England, and the two of them were known for being very philanthropic and giving to local charities and schools and things of the like. So to most of the British public, Captain Franklin seemed like a natural fit. So why was he the Admiralty's 5th choice? Well, Captain Franklin was second in command during another Arctic expedition in 1818, and he was also a part of 2 separate Canadian expeditions in the decades that followed. Keep in mind, any one of these expeditions would take a few years at least. Well, one of these expeditions ended in disaster when the crew essentially became lost and their food provisions ran out. As a matter of fact, according to sailors, during this time, Franklin's crew became so desperate for food that they began cutting and eating the leather of their own boots, to which Franklin was given the nickname by some sailors, the man who ate his own boot. However, because of his pleasant demeanor and place in British society, he was again the 5th choice of the Admiralty, and he readily accepted the job. Some historians say that perhaps he took it in haste because he was trying to make up for the shame of being called, the man that ate his own boot.
That is entirely possible.
However, even if this were the case, he was incredibly careful and lighthearted around the people in the crew, and throughout the entire expedition, I could find no one writing of ill will about him. The expedition was to occur across 2 ships, and to make sure that everything went well, the aforementioned 3rd and 4th choices were also made a part of the expedition. Franklin himself was set to captain the HMS Erebus, while Francis Crozier, the 3rd choice I mentioned earlier, who was knocked out of the league because he was Irish, was given command of the HMS Terror and named executive officer of the expedition.
Oh, so he can command one of the ships, he just can't command the expedition. Wow. Wow, society has changed a lot in recent years. Man, that's degrading as heck. Irish, British, come on, they're not that different. I have something in my glasses. Well, one would think that with these top candidates, not technically the top candidates, but with the top candidates, there's still something in my glasses. One would think with these top candidates that the expedition would not have ended in such failure. Like, would it have ended quite as badly as it did? Who knows? But you'd think with this level of experience and expertise with these 3 individuals alone, a little bit less so with the 4th guy, more with Franklin and the Irishman, but you would think that it wouldn't have gone so wrong like it did. And for the longest time, people didn't even know how it went wrong, or how badly. A lot of that information I don't think was found out until the last century at least. I wonder where the name Erebus comes from, because that is a very cool name. Some of the names of the ships that they would come up with way back in this day, and even in the last 100 years. I mean, look at the frickin' Titanic and the Lusitania. Jeez. Where do they come up with these names? Okay, I can understand where they came up with Titanic, being Titan, but my point still stands. Not the point, but not the point.
And the 4th choice, the young Captain James Fitzjames, was named as Franklin's second-in-command aboard the Erebus itself. The government naturally felt better that even though their 5th option was the one leading the charge, the 3rd and 4th options were right there with him. Franklin's ship, the Erebus, and Crozier's ship, the Terror, had each been a part of Arctic expeditions from 1841 to 1844. Now, you may be thinking it's probably in bad faith to name a series of expedition ships the Terror and the Erebus, which Erebus comes from Greek mythology as being the dark ring around Hades itself. Well, the reason that the two ships were named that is because they were each originally part of the British military. As a matter of fact, the Terror was in the War of 1812 and took part in the attack on Fort McHenry.
What did I say? It's a good name for a warship, but an exploration ship. Did I mention something about unless it was a warship that was converted into an exploration ship? I don't think I said that last part, but I specifically said that the Terror is a good name for like a warship. They were warships reused for exploration. What did I say? What the frick did I say? Okay, so that's where the name Erebus comes from. It's the ring around Hades. Got it. Did not know that, which is a little surprising because I am actually very familiar with Roman and Greek mythology, but I did not realize that. Okay, so 2 of the captains were in Arctic expeditions, rather. What do you say, between 1841 and 1844? That's only 3 years. So you're lucky to get 2 expeditions out of that, which means that they have 4 expeditions under their belt, which isn't super reassuring. Because, like he said, Arctic expeditions would take a year at least each. And I'd say about a year and a half. So, I mean, we're still talking anywhere between maybe 2 and 6 expeditions, Arctic expeditions, between the 2 of them. It's not bad, but it's also not super reassuring, given the gravity of what they were trying to do.
Well, the reason that the 2 ships were named that is because they were each originally part of the British military. As a matter of fact, the Terror was in the War of 1812 and took part in the attack on Fort McHenry, which was the battle in which Francis Scott Key wrote America's national anthem. They were each massive ships, with the Erebus weighing 378 tons and the Terror weighing in at 331 tons. The ships at the time were also state-of-the-art. They were lined with these iron bands and reinforced walls, and the propellers and rudders even had a function where a latch could be pulled and they would fold inside of the ship.
How useful is that?
That way, if you
for
pass through a lot of ice, it could just bump off
ice.
the iron and you wouldn't worry about knocking anything off.
Okay.
The ships were also ahead of their time in that they had steam engines inside of them, which had been taken
this was
off
the
of
era of
trains.
steam engines.
So if you were at open sea and
That's
there were no
right.
winds, you could still move by bringing in salt water, purifying it, and then using it to burn steam and power the ship. It even had a heating system that was piped throughout the ship, which, again, in 1845 was a huge deal. In the months before the departure, the men were essentially seen as astronauts. They were hailed as being the brave people who are going to step out and change our way of life as we know
100 plus years before
and
astronauts
as
were actually
historians have
existed.
noted, an astronaut is given their spaceship, and the Terror and Erebus served as spaceships of their time. Now, it turned out
that
that
time period,
the
I can see that.
construction of their ships ended up being part of the problem down the road, but right now I'm talking about the fun, lighthearted stuff. We'll talk about the death and destruction in a little bit. Lady Franklin was incredibly proud of her husband, and as soon as the officers of the voyage were announced, she made all of them get their picture taken, which was a brand new technology at the time. She also bought her husband a pet monkey named Jacko, who was to accompany them on their journey.
What?
In the meantime,
Oh.
Captain Crozier of the Terror brought along his Newfoundland dog by the name of Neptune. The ships also
Newfoundland.
had
It's
a
a
cat on board,
Newfoundland.
however, that's less remarkable as that
Newfoundland.
was kind of
What?
a necessity at the time, because, you know, if you were out there for 3 years and then mice destroyed your food supply, that would be bad. Each
That'll be
ship
not good.
also left with over 1,000 books in their respective libraries, as well as different
Damn.
sporting effects.
Those are big
Because,
ships.
you know, if your ship is stopped in the middle of the ice and it's so thick that you can get out and walk on it,
You need something to
so
do.
that way you don't lose your mind, it's probably a good idea to, like, play a few games while you're out there. Each ship was also equipped with several barrels of liquor and 2 tons of tobacco. Again, not to ship or haul any of it, this is just so the sailors don't go crazy. They even
Wow, that's a
left
lot of
with
tobacco.
different costumes and fancy clothes, so that way if they were bored, they could put on plays for each other. I should also mention that the men
Oh
of
my
the
word.
Erebus would cut up the costumes and make tiny costumes for Jacko. Another recent
Oh, okay,
invention
that's
that
cute.
was a very big deal at the time was that of canned food. See, it had always been an issue historically of keeping food so that it doesn't go
Keeping food
bad. So the
preserved
fact
for
that you
long
could
periods of
seal
time.
and preserve it was a huge deal on expeditions like this. However, what came to light after all of this is that the British government hired the lowest bidder to make over 8,000 tins of food about
Oh, no.
7 weeks before the ships were set to set sail.
Oh, no.
This became a problem that I'll talk about in a little bit. Also, the other
What
food
were the
source
cans lined
was
with or
cattle,
sealed
because
with?
the ship was so big, they would just straight up bring cattle on board, which, I mean, if you don't have a refrigerator, I guess you just let the steak refrigerate itself until you need it. Despite all these
Oh, my
preparations,
word.
however, only 6 men of the 134-man crew had any experience with the Arctic.
Oh,
Nevertheless, on May the
no.
19th of
Oh, dear.
1845, the Franklin expedition set sail from England.
That is one thing you absolutely do. You want to have, for a treacherous journey like this, you want to have as much experience as humanly possible. If you're going to take less than, trying to do the quick math in my head, if less than 5% of the crew out of 100+ crew have experience with Arctic expeditions, that is already a recipe for disaster. And it's also a recipe for disaster as soon as he mentioned about the tin can food and there being a lowest bidder to try and get all of that taken care of. You know, for the mid-1800s, my first immediate thought is, what were the cans lined with, or what were they sealed with? Or even both. Because there are plenty of things that you do not want to be consuming in excessive amounts, depending on how poorly they are contained. Lead, I think, was definitely one of them in the time of the 1800s for maybe throughout like the 17, 18, and 1900s. Lead poisoning was definitely a possibility with improper use of, especially if it was maybe used to, say, seal canned food. Oof. Lead poisoning is nasty. The unfortunate thing is that lead poisoning and other kinds of poisoning, especially with, things like arsenic or asbestos. Hi, Esmer! Things like asbestos or arsenic poisoning, or even lead poisoning, I wouldn't say they're common. They are not uncommon even in this day and age. And lead poisoning in particular can be some really nasty stuff. I mean, it doesn't just affect your body in a variety of ways, especially relating to headaches and general fatigue and constipation and general intestinal issues, but it can even cause memory problems. It can cause seizures. And the problem with lead is that it doesn't matter if you ingest it or come into contact with it. It can still poison you either way. Immediately off the bat, having so few of your crew members being aware of how Arctic expeditions go, this was already a failed expedition from the start. So they didn't actually set sail for Greenland until May. They set sail from England, but I'm pretty sure the expedition technically started in Greenland. So they didn't actually get to Greenland until May or June. That's really late. They should have gone earlier, probably February or March, because granted, there can be some cold weather and ice up there, but not necessarily that far north. And even if it's not that far north, I don't think it gets quite as bad as it does it definitely doesn't get as bad as it does in the Arctic during the winter, at least. If they set sail from England to Greenland in May, and probably didn't actually get to Greenland until maybe June, that's poor planning. That's absolutely poor planning. Another reason that this expedition was failed right from the get-go.
Nevertheless, on May the 19th of 1845, the Franklin expedition set sail from England. The crew consisted of 24 officers and 110 sailors. They made a brief stop in Scotland as the Barretto Jr. and HMS Rattler accompanied them to the coast of Greenland. At this point, the Rattler transferred over the last of the supplies that the men would need and took back 5 sailors from the Erebus and Terror who had become sick during their journey. These 5 are the only survivors of the Franklin expedition. As the Rattler departed, it also took the final letters of the men that were to be sent home back to England. In Franklin's 14-page letter to his wife, he had said that spirits were high, and although he had banned drunkenness and swearing amongst the crew, they still seemed to enjoy his company. He also mentioned that Jacko was stealing several trinkets from the men, but they all thought he was cute, so they didn't care. From all of the letters that were sent that day, everyone seemed to be in good hopes and thought that the journey would turn out well. In July of 1845, a whaling ship passed the Terror and the Erebus at the Baffin Bay as the whaling ship was heading back to England, and the expedition was working its way closer to the Canadian Arctic. This sighting of the whaling ship is the last time that any of the crew were ever seen alive, at least officially, but we'll get there. Now, before I get into theories and talking about what happened to the expedition specifically through discoveries that were made, let's talk about what led up to those discoveries.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about, in terms of trying to locate the Franklin expedition, there are lots of conflicting accounts in terms of who might have seen them last and if those accounts were properly recorded or not. I think I remember there being a lot of debate about the initial investigation processes. Hello.
See, this voyage in particular was supposed to take about a year and a half. So when 1847 rolled around and there was no word from any ships that had seen him or any letters conveyed back home, people started to worry. And one of those people was Lady Franklin herself. Whenever she brought her concerns to the Admiralty, they said that they were unfounded. So Franklin, in an attempt to find out of her husband's whereabouts, began to amass people and committees in order to get the state to do something. To which her friend Charles Dickens began writing in the paper, urging the public to say something about the missing Franklin expedition. Eventually, the government did and sent 2 sea expeditions and 1 land expedition across northern Canada to look for any sign of the crew. Furthermore, the state put out a £20,000 reward for anyone who could find the crew, which by today's money is about $2 million. And thanks to no small part to Lady Franklin's urging, it became a matter of public interest of what became of the expedition itself. A song even became popular at the time, known as Lady Franklin's Lament. Eventually, the search party found some sign of the expedition when in 1850 on Beechey Island, they found several tin cans, what looked to be the remnant of a camp, as well as 3 graves buried in the ice. The names on the headstones were that of 3 members of the expedition, spaced out over the course of several months.
4th grade pictured as of a search team member who died of illness on the boat. Okay. Gotcha. I was wondering why there was 4 graves and he said that there were 3 graves. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, I needed time to be able to read that as I was listening to him at the same time, which is very difficult to do.
The names on the headstones were that of 3 members of the expedition, spaced out over the course of several months. It wasn't uncommon for people to get out in the middle of the cold and die of pneumonia or tuberculosis, so this didn't prove that the entire crew had met a tragic end.
That is true.
And as a matter of fact, it shows that they were in enough state that they could still bury their dead. However, the dates on the tombstone indicated that they were buried in 1845, meaning that this had to occur in the first several months of the expedition. Furthermore, in 1851, an iceberg began to be spotted off the coast of Greenland that had 2 ships stuck in the ice of the iceberg itself. Now, it turned out later that these were actually 2 abandoned whaling ships, but stories of seeing 2 giant ships frozen in ice didn't help quell any of the fears back home. In 1852, a captain by the name of Edward Belcher managed to get trapped in the ice while looking for the Franklin expedition, and a total of 4 ships were lost and had to be abandoned during this voyage. This isn't necessarily related to the story, But one of those ships was called the HMS Resolute, which was recovered by
Wow.
Americans several years later, and
Oh.
as a sort of gift, America returned that ship to Britain, to which Britain then made several desks out of the wood of the ship, and one of those desks, called the Resolute desk, was gifted to President Hayes and still sits in the Oval Office to this day. Just
Oh.
fun note. There's a lot of
That's a
reports
fun
that
note. I
Belcher was
like
very
that. That's
hasty and made a
cool.
lot of bad decisions during the voyage, and that's what led to losing 4 ships. However, this was enough to scare the British government away from looking for the crew after so much cost had already been accrued. And officially, the expedition was declared lost and the crew dead on March the 31st of 1854.
Yeesh.
The next month, on April the 21st of 1854, a man by the name of John Ray, who was from Britain but was currently living with the Inuit people in Canada, said
Oh.
that he came into contact with a few natives who said that they had found signs of the Franklin expedition. See, at this point, no one had any
Oh.
idea what happened to the expedition, and this was the first clue of their whereabouts since the 1845 campsite. While talking to local natives, John Ray said that they came across a campsite of some 35 to 40 men who were all wasted
that's a
away
lot.
and dead. Specifically near the southernmost point of King William Island, near the opening of the Back River at northern Canada. The natives had several items to prove that their story was true, including silverware with Crozier's initials on it, as well as framed pictures of the captains themselves. The most horrific part of the story is that the hunting party that came across this campsite said several of the bodies were mutilated and cut up, and due to human remains being in the fireplace,
cannibalism?
it was suggested that the final survivors had to resort to cannibalism. John Ray collected several more testimonies and then brought his findings back to Britain. This
Let me guess, they
coincided
didn't
with
like
an
it.
unrelated search that happened in 1855, in which a crew said that they found a piece of wood located on King William Island that had Erebus carved into it, and another piece of wood that had Mr. Stanley carved into it. Mr. Stanley being the name of the doctor aboard the Erebus.
Oh.
John Ray's findings were published in papers across England, and people lost their minds.
Didn't like it.
Primarily at the suggestion of cannibalism. See, at the time, concepts of people being pushed to the brink and the horrors of survival and things like that weren't really commonplace in people's mindset, and cannibalism was just seen as the ultimate act of evil.
I mean, just look at the Donner Party. Because, man, I think that might have been 1800s as well. Hang on, let me do a quick bit of research just to confirm. Donner Party was 1846 through 1847, which is kind of sort of around the time that this all was happening, which is hilarious, actually. I mean, tragic still in numerous ways, but still funny given the very similar timelines. But it's no different from the Donner Party. And at this period of time, or any time earlier, the very act of cannibalism, I think for the longest time, was attributed to to Satan or some kind of sin or evil wrongdoing. Because many people in their lives, a vast majority of the population, even by today's standards, are not so often subjected to the brink of starvation like what would have happened in the Donner Party or the Franklin expedition. People don't know what happens when they become desperate. People can literally, technically I don't know either, but from what I understand, it would make sense that people would start to lose their minds, they would start to lose their grip on their morals and on reality, and would resort to drastic measures in order to survive. It's the common principle of the fight, flight, or freeze response. You fight, you fly, or you freeze. Most people think it's just fight or flight, but technically there's about 4 or 5 different things that could happen, but fight or flight or fight, flight, or freeze are usually the most common understandings of that general principle. And when you're desperate, when you're on the brink of starvation, of dehydration, of hyper or hypothermia, of anything really, you probably lose all common sense. And whatever you think you know, whatever you've been doing your whole life, that pretty much gets tossed out the window, because now you're going to be put in a position you've never been in before, where you're desperate for one reason or another. I mean, in this case, very likely starvation for the crew, especially if they had spent months out on the ice with little to no food or water and no easy way to move around to carry their supplies with them. I mean, those kinds of things are a little bit, I won't say accepted, but the explanations behind them are a little more accepted. Back then, back in this time period, not so much. It was seen more as a sin, as like Wendigoon said, more of an evil act than it was a desperate need to survive, or some weird fetish. But we're not going to go into that territory. So yeah, this is the conflicting information that Wendigoon was talking about earlier, and that I think I mentioned earlier as well. I didn't specifically know what it was, but this sounds about right. Where there were Inuit people who were making these claims, but people didn't want to accept it. It was conflicting information because it was beyond the scope of what not just British people, but people in general knew and believed. They didn't want to accept that their fellow kinsmen were cannibals. Understandably so. But this is desperation. You think you know what you're going to do when you're desperate. You really don't. In the heat of the moment, I think nobody knows what they're going to do until they actually experience it. Even then, I don't think they still know. They just have a pretty good idea of what might happen if they're in the heat of the moment and they're desperate enough. When your life is on the line, everything else goes out the window. And all you're focusing on is, how am I going to survive? How am I going to live another day? I mean, that's... Granted, that might not be completely accurate, and I just technically contradicted myself, but biologically and psychologically speaking, that makes the most sense. It does. So, I guess in a roundabout way, I'm trying to say, in a way, cannibalism makes sense. I'm not saying it's acceptable, it just makes sense. Only in certain circumstances.
And cannibalism was just seen as the ultimate act of evil. So the people who left 10 years earlier as the superheroes aboard their rocket ship off into the Great White Wonder were now being considered the worst of the worst. Several people just simply didn't accept the information, Charles Dickens being one of them, saying that he didn't use the word savages, but he heavily implied savages of the North just made it up because they don't understand British dignity. Either way, Lady Franklin was determined now more than ever to find some evidence of what happened to her husband and his crew. However, as mentioned earlier, the government wasn't having it, so she used her own money to commission an expedition all by herself.
Wow.
Well, commission sailors to go do it all by themselves. She didn't go all by herself, although that would be kind of neat.
That would be
badass. On July
badass.
the 2nd of 1857, a ship known as Fox set sail to try to find some evidence of the Franklin crew. And sure enough, on the northern shore of King William Island, the first evidence of the expedition was found. Inside of a cairn, which is essentially a pile of rocks, in a box was the only known note to come from this entire voyage. I'll explain what the note was whenever I get to the specifics of what happened to the crew, but also discovered nearby was a skeleton wearing a work uniform of someone aboard the Erebus. Furthermore, on the western shore of King William Island, they found a lifeboat of the Terror, which was full of unneeded supplies like soap and combs and brushes and silverware and things that wouldn't be needed for walking across the island, as well as 2 more skeletons laying within the lifeboat. There was another man named Charles Francis Hall who also lived among the Inuit people, who was determined to find some evidence of the expedition. From 1860 to 1869, he explored the entire area of King William's Island and the back river of northern Canada, while also interviewing local natives to try to see if he could piece together what happened. Hall found various graves all across his journey and took hundreds of testimonies from those he came across. Over the years, the testimonies dwindled from seeing large groups of men walking across the island all the way down to just 2 in 1858. So with the information that all of the
Yeah.
people I just mentioned gathered, let's try to put together what happened to the Franklin expedition.
Imagine, because the expedition disappeared around, what was it, 1844, 1845. And if the reports of seeing 2, 3 men from the expedition in 1858 are true, that's 10 plus years that survivors from the Erebus or the Terror could have been, and that thought alone is insane. But we don't technically know if it's true. They all could have died within less than a year. Some of them could have survived a couple of years. Maybe a rare few could have survived upwards of 10 years. But we don't know all the information for sure. From what I understand, we actually know a lot now. A lot. But we technically don't know all the details, and we don't know a lot of the dates or general timelines. I think we have a really, really rough estimate for a lot of the events. But there's still a lot of information that we don't know and that we probably never will know. And that's the unfortunate thing with cases like this, is that there are so many people, and even the prominent people in history, there's still a lot we don't know about them. Franklin and his expedition team included. And there are some people that will just be lost to time and history forever. Look at some of the videos that Scary Interesting often covers on his channel. He goes into detail about so many of these caving accidents, about these cave diving accidents, and people mysteriously disappearing. And there's still so many people that are gone or disappeared without a trace, even decades later. And unfortunately, in many cases, we might never know what will happen, what happened to them. And we can only speculate. Now, is there a chance that maybe some skeletons of some of those people are going to get discovered in 100 years? You never know. It is entirely possible. Or by that point, time would have just degraded a lot of their skeletons to the point where they're completely unrecognizable, or they're in a completely new form, as in they're not even a skeleton anymore, they're something else. Sorry, I did not mean to get quite that dark. Yeah, it's insane stuff like this that really shifts your perspective on the world, on people and exploration and journeys and missions. So many things. We humans aim to do so much, to explore everything, to make everything, to do everything in a sense. But sometimes Mother Nature just likes to bitch slap us right back and say no.
So with the information that all of the people I just mentioned gathered, let's try to put together what happened to the Franklin expedition. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the last time they were spotted was in July of 1845. From that location at Baffin Bay to the campsite that was found at Beachy Island, it seems that everything was going well up until that point. As I mentioned earlier, it was expected that whenever winter hit, they would be stuck for several months. And during this time, it seems that they were stuck at Beachy Island, which would explain the 3 bodies and hundreds of food cans which were found thrown out on shore. For reasons I'll explain later, it was determined that these 3 had died of pneumonia, while tragic, not unexpected. However, it seems that perhaps their ship was moving too slow, and they were there until the next winter, where the ship was stuck off the northern coast of King William's Island in September of 1846. Remember how way earlier in the video I mentioned that these were 2 naval warships which were heavily kitted out with all of this cool material to make sure that they stay running?
Did they have
something that wasn't
protection?
considered until years later is the incredible weight that these ships had. See, whenever you're trying to break through the ice to get around the Arctic, speed is a priority. And while these ships certainly have the fortifications to make sure they didn't sink if they ran into any ice,
did not have the speed.
That also weighed them down, ensuring that they weren't quick enough to break through it. And remember that steam engine I mentioned earlier, the one that came from a locomotive and was put into the ships? Well, while a fantastic idea at the time, if these things were opened up 100%, they could go a speed of 7.4 kilometers an hour, or about 4.5 miles per hour. Again, not
Oof.
enough to get any substantial distance through
No.
frozen water. It wasn't uncommon for ships at the time to get ice bound up in the propellers of their system, to which someone would have to do the nauseating process of putting on a diving suit, going overboard, and breaking it off with a stick. So perhaps a combination of the
times.
water freezing and it taking too long to break the ice in front of them, which was often done with long sticks and explosives, as well as ice itself freezing to the ship and propeller, they didn't travel as fast as they thought they could.
Understandable,
Another
given the
factor
size of the
is the
ship.
navigation of the expedition itself. While this wasn't stated on the note and there were no survivors to say for sure, it's quite possible that they quite literally took the wrong turn. See, at the time it was mapped
That is
and
entirely
documented to go north through Baffin Bay and then come south to the north of King William's Island. However, at the time, and part of the reason the expedition existed, it wasn't known if it was best to take a more westward or eastward route through the channels to get out.
True.
From what we know now, it seems that they took a route into the more open and mainland line of water, which turned out to be a problem because, as we also know, Al, that is a primary route for polar ice caps to break off and then flow through the mainstream.
That's right.
Meaning if
in
they took the
Kentucky
other
Channel.
term, they could go through what is now the Simpson Strait and make their voyage into Asia, but instead they went the other route, which, while manageable today, would have been impossible at the time. Regardless, the True was trapped off the coast of King William Island in 1846, and it was here that the
1846.
note was placed inside of the cairn that I mentioned earlier. Also, I'm going to assume you can't read latitude and longitude, and if you can,
Nope.
you're better at this than I am.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say
Latitude and
location
longitude
whenever
is
we get
really
to it.
hard.
HMS ship Erebus and Terror wintered in the ice in location, having wintered in
Hold up.
18...
The date mentioned by Crozier is off by 1 year on both writing occasions. We know this because his timeline does not line up with the ship's final sighting nor the dates on the beachy graves. There's been a historical discrepancy, with the only answer being that Crozier miswrote the year within his letter, which is very feasible given his distress and lack of records for comparison. Okay. Sorry, I wanted to read that first and then listen to him. Just to confirm.
HMS ship Erebus and Terror wintered in the ice in location, having wintered in 1846 to 1847 at Beechy Island in location, after having ascended Wellington Channel to location and returned by the west side of Cornwallis Island, Sir John Franklin commanding the expedition. All well. So as mentioned there, this was written and very legible at Beechy Island, the first location where the ship was frozen. This second note is written in the margins around the paper and seems to be in much more distress. HMS ships Terror and Erebus were deserted on the 22nd of April, leagues north and northwest of this, having been beset since the 12th of September, 1846.
Oof.
The officers and crews, consisting of 105 souls, under the command of Captain F.R.M. Crozier. Before the note goes on to describe the manner in which this note was retrieved, and it then says, Sir John Franklin died on June the 11th of 1847, and the total loss
46.
by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. Signed by James Fitzjames, captain of the HMS Erebus.
Oh.
The note itself was signed by Crozier and Fitzjames, and as mentioned, indicated that Franklin had died on June the 11th, and as mentioned at the end, that made Fitzjames the new captain of the Erebus.
Yep.
So what went wrong? Yes, they were stuck frozen in the water a second time, but the ship had rations for 3 years and up to 5 if they strung out their meals. Well, remember that little detail I mentioned in the beginning, that 7 weeks before they were set to launch, the lowest bidder made 8,000 cans of food? Whenever these tins of cans were found on Beechy Island, they were examined and had the worst sealing job you could imagine. For one, the soldering to close off the can itself was
Soldering.
done with molten lead, and on the inside of the
No.
food there was liquid lead that had been hardened after it ran all in the meal,
Oh.
which, you know, probably isn't good for you.
Oh no, it was lead. Oh, worst fears confirmed. Worst fears confirmed. I know he said solder, which, you know, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the word SOLDER. So It's actually pronounced solder. Sorry, I don't mean to correct him, but I actually have personal experience with this. I work with a lot of engineers, and the term like electrical and mechanical and design engineers, guys who have decades of experience under their belt. I've actually gotten to help solder some optical elements onto scientific instruments that my team helped develop. So I'm a little bit familiar with terminology like that. But yes, he says solder. It is solder. The canned food was soldered with lead. That is not good. I talked about lead poisoning earlier. You know how bad it is if you get enough. And I think primarily you can get lead poisoning by ingesting, but I think you can also get it via skin contact as well. I believe. But definitely through well, theoretically, you can get poisoned by any metal through ingesting. Some you really can't get poisoned via like skin contact, but some you can. And I think lead is one of them. I think. Oh, Lois better use lead. Oh, that hurts. Oh, that hurts. Because that definitely does not happen nowadays. At least, not generally speaking. I hope it doesn't.
And on the inside of the food, there was liquid lead that had been hardened after it ran all in the
Oh,
meal, which,
no.
probably isn't good for you.
No,
But
no,
all of
it's
the
not.
cans showed signs of erosion and improper sealing, and one of the primary theories of what went wrong is that the food spoiled.
Even if lead wouldn't have affected them as much, the fact that it would have been improperly sealed would have meant that, like he said, it would have spoiled faster, meaning that it would not last as long, and it could lead, like the food itself, completely excluding the lead aspect, could lead to health issues over time, especially given how long that they would have been stranded at Beachy Island for, which I'm trying to understand. It's a little bit tricky to understand the timeline, but from the timeline, it sounds like they were stranded at Beachy Island for at least a winter before they continued on, and then were stranded the following year. Or no, I think if I'm remembering what he was saying earlier correctly, they were actually stranded around Beachy Island for about a whole year. And then they managed to break free, and then they went further south to King William Island, but then they were stranded in the fall of that year, which would have been 46 by that point, and then they abandoned the ships because they just couldn't break them free, but they abandoned the ships in April of the following year, which would have been 40... Wait, hold up. No, 46. Let me see if I got the timeline correctly. So, May of 44, they set out from Britain to Greenland, and I think sometime in May or June, they set out from Greenland over and then started heading over to Canada. They were last spotted around July of 44. They reached King William Island probably sometime around the fall, I think, of 44, before they got stranded for, I think, almost a year. Something along those lines, before they managed to break free at some point in 45. They made their way down south to King William Island, got stuck again around the tip of King William Island around 45, and then they abandoned ship. They abandoned both ships around April 46. Assuming that that's going off the timeline not based on Crozier's letter and dates, which would sound about right. Because if he did end up writing, if he did end up writing those notes in 47 instead, that would have meant that they would have been stuck at Beachy Island probably for almost 2 years. So what could have happened is what is the first count that I just said. The second possibility that could have happened was that Crozier actually got his dates right, and some of the witness accounts with remembering years was actually a little bit wrong, which is entirely possible. Equally as possible that Crozier just messed up his own dates. But yeah, if Crozier did mess up his dates, the first timeline that I mentioned is what likely happened. But if Crozier's dates were correct, then that could actually indicate that they were stuck at Beachy Island for about a year, and then they made their way down south, and they were stuck at King William Island for almost 2 years, or almost a year and a half instead of, the September to April. which would make sense as to why they would have abandoned ship, because they would have been stuck there for more than a year. But that's assuming that Crozier's dates are correct. But it actually does seem a little more possible and a little more likely that Crozier's dates were incorrect. So they were probably just stuck for a while, from September to April of the following year, instead of more than a year and a half. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Furthermore, if that canned food went bad, then the men would be subject to scurvy. Now, most ships at the time,
true.
including the Terror and Erebus, would keep lemon juice in bottles to drink to keep scurvy away. However, the effective time of lemon juice is about a year, and as established, it had been 2 years at this point. And the lead poisoning of the foods and everything combined, there was a lot of different ways these guys could have died.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll continue to
Absolutely.
stake my flag on the idea that the food went bad because of the final note written in the margin of the page by Crozier, which says, "And start on tomorrow, the 26th, for Back's Fish River." This lines up with what I mentioned earlier of several relics being found on the way to Back's Fish River. So if the food was still good, they would have stayed on the ships because the ships were made to get frozen in ice and then keep going. But if it's bad, then the guys had no other
That's
option
true.
than to walk across the expanse of King William's Island. Which King William's Island is an empty island
It's barren.
full of rocks and ice.
Yeah.
So very inhospitable. This also explains why there was a lifeboat found full of supplies on the west coast of the island. From piecing together everything, it seems that Crozier, now acting as commander of the survivors of the ship, brought at least one lifeboat and filled it with several of the supplies the men would need.
Yep.
Possibly any food that was still good, and at least initially, some supplies for morale, like combs and spoons and extra boots and etc. The purpose of the lifeboat being, for one, to carry the supplies, but also so that whenever they get to Back's Fish River, they can then get in the lifeboat and take it down the river, because the only known settlement was several hundred miles down Back's River.
Yep.
Meaning that even if they did get all the way to King William's Island, they would then have to continue paddling down river for potentially months.
Wow.
But it was either that or starve to death on the boat. So as mentioned in the letter, the men set out on April 26th. The distance from where the letter was found to the mouth of the river was about 248 miles. One group of natives said they came across the men during this time who asked them for food, but the natives themselves had to take care of their own and weren't able to offer much,
Yeah.
but that they did witness about 40 men walking across King William's Island south towards Canada. And from there, I wish there was more to say, but it seems the Franklin expedition, at least officially, vanished off the face of the earth. I'm going to talk about some of the modern findings of this
Fair.
case, but there's a couple things I want to mention that are my favorite details of the story.
Oh.
The last relics that can be positively ID'd as part of the expedition were found about 40 miles north of the river, meaning that the men had made it some 200 miles across King William's Island.
Wow.
However, remember how earlier I stated there were several natives who said they came into contact with 2 men? Well, that was in Canada. As a matter of fact, about 250 miles south of the northern border of Canada in 1858. And when shown pictures, all of the natives identified one of the men as Captain Crozier of the HMS Terror. If this were
Wow.
to be true, that would mean that Captain Crozier and one other man had successfully walked about 600 miles over the course of 12
years.
In 1948,
That's
around the
insane.
same region of northern Canada, there was another cairn very similar to the one found on Beechy Island. And inside of the cairn was a wooden box that was put together with dovetail wood, which was a practice in mid-1800s England. Sadly and very frustratingly, the box was destroyed and no note was found, but if that was set up by Crozier and the other man, that would confirm the idea that they had walked for over a decade 600 miles through the Arctic.
That is
the
true.
other detail I want to mention is that of the expedition's mission itself. Remember I said there were remnants of the crew found on the western side of King William's Island?
Yes.
Well, from the coast of King William's Island, you can actually see the Simpson Strait, which is the opening that was later discovered to be the pathway through the Arctic to Asia. And it's incredibly possible that that was the last thing in the
Oh
men's
man,
mind at the time. But I
that's
like to
fair.
think at some point the captain and the men looked over and saw the entry to the Eastern world and realized that even if just to themselves, they discovered it. As a matter of fact, England agrees with me too, but let's talk about some of the more modern discoveries. In
All right,
1981, a
let's
researcher
do
by
it.
the name of Owen Beatty was determined to find out what happened to the Franklin expedition. Beatty and his research team explored the region of King William's Island where the lifeboat was previously identified.
Hmm.
Between that location and Victory Point, the original area that the letter was found, they found several bones of the crewmen. Upon examination, the bones had pitting that was consistent with cases of scurvy, as well as lead concentrations 10 times over the regular amount.
Ugh,
So the theory of the food being bad is pretty well supported. However, the other thing that they found on the
that's not
bones
good.
was several scratches and knife cuts, indicating that there was
Cannibalism.
most likely some form of cannibalism present.
I'm
Furthermore, at
shocked,
several of the
Cotton.
makeshift campsites they found along the way, there were bones that seemed to be polished by the inside of a pot, which is seen in cases of extreme cannibalism, or I should say, when cannibalism's needed in extremes, and people try to boil the marrow out of the bones, indicating how hungry these
Oh,
men were.
that's
All in
right,
all,
because
from
you can get
1981 to
nutrients from some of the
1982,
marrow.
Beatty found the remains of 6 to 14 people. To confirm his theories about the death of the men, he needed another example for the time. And lo and behold, perfect examples existed
Donnor
in the
party?
graves on Beachy Island.
Oh,
I'm going
oh,
to show
okay.
what could be considered to many disturbing imagery, but I
Ooh,
feel this
yes.
is
I would
important for
love
the
to see
historical
this.
connotation and also
Yes.
the science aspect of it, and is for a purely educational sense. However, understand if you don't like that, so there will be a timestamp in the description to skip past these
Hmm.
pictures, but these are the images of the bodies exhumed from Beachy Island.
Okay. Disclaimer warning for me as well. I will also put probably a timestamp either on the video or in the video description if people don't want to see these images. I want to see them. I am extremely curious, and I have no problem with images like these. I do not have a weak stomach at all. There's a reason I went into forensic science, specifically into the crime scene investigation route. I am deeply fascinated with anatomy and taphonomy, which is the study of decomposition. I even have an entire video on it, which I am hoping to remake at some point, but anyways. But yes, disclaimer from him as well as me. I will be looking at these images. You don't have to. If you are just as curious as I am, or you've seen these images and they don't bother you at all, or they don't bother you too much, you're welcome to see them. I want to see them. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
But these are the images of the bodies exhumed from Beachy Island. Despite the ghastly look, the tissues were in near perfect
They
condition,
are in such good
which
condition.
allowed very accurate samples of the bodies as well as the causes of death to be determined.
Wow.
And also, while this is mostly an informational explanation that I'm giving
They
you,
are very
I
well
don't want to gloss
preserved.
over the horror and simultaneous wonder of people being consumed by the elements,
Mm-hmm.
yet in death being completely consecrated by them.
Yeah.
And there's such a it's a vicious poetry to it.
It's
It was found on
desperation.
these bodies that the cause of death was in fact pneumonia, supporting the theory people at the time had that everything went wrong the winter after Beachy Island. From 1984
Yeah, 'cause
to
there were only 3
1993,
graves.
over 400 bones were found along King William's Island, and many of which indicated signs of cannibalism. Perhaps most tragic was the feature that the hands, feet, and head all seemed to be removed before the cannibal acts were taken, as if the most human parts of their friends they wanted to remove before committing what was to them such a
Wow.
horrendous act.
Despite the very dark act of succumbing to cannibalism, it is still, in its own way, very respectful, I feel, that they wanted to remove what they considered to be the most human aspect, the most alive aspect of their companions, you know, being the head, hands, and feet, and then consuming the rest of their bodies, basically. It's dark and tragic, sure, but strangely, there's still this degree of respect and honor that they have, despite having to resort to eating their own companions. That is amazing. that is, despite their desperation, they still did that. That is really amazing, actually.
See, while the people of Britain thought it was such a horrible, atrocious action that no sane man would ever commit, the people
They
who
weren't
were a
sane.
part of this expedition also had those same ideas. And while
They
they
weren't
had
sane
to
by
do
this
it to
point.
survive, the ghastly nature that the people back home felt of them, I'm sure they felt 10 times over. So you're probably
Yeah.
asking yourself the question, well, if they found all of the bodies of the men, what about the ships themselves? Well, over the years, there were several sonar studies and helicopter missions to try to see if they could find any remains of the ship. Well, finally, on September the 9th of 2014, the Erebus was found sunken under just 36 feet of water, not far from the northernmost point of King William's Island.
Pieces of the Erebus were found just north of King William Island, but the majority of the ship was found on the northern Canadian coast, indicating it floated away with the summer tide. Which does make sense, because I'm seeing on King William Island there's the Erebus south of King William Island. So yeah, okay, got it. I'm with it.
Well, finally, on September the 9th of 2014, the Erebus was found sunken under just 36 feet of water, not far from the northernmost point of King William's Island, specifically at the location known as Wilmot and Crampton Bay. The ship had simply sunk from years of disrepair, and after drones and cameras went through the ship, it seems to be in completely idyllic condition. As a matter of fact,
Crazy.
the Erebus is still in its exhuming process, and it's
Oh,
currently
wow.
said that the first 65 artifacts that are recovered will go back to England, and the remaining artifacts will belong to Canada and the Inuit people. And then on September
Okay.
12th of 2016, the Terror was found much
2016.
farther to the south. As a matter of fact, out of
That's
complete
150 plus years
coincidence,
later.
the Terror was found in a place known as Terror Bay. Perhaps most bizarrely about the Terror, other than the fact that it
Oh
sank in a place
no.
named Terror, was the fact that its anchors were still up and locked. See, whenever these ships got frozen, they would drop
Wow.
their anchors to make sure that they didn't float away or randomly tilt if the ice were to crack or thaw out. Furthermore, it was much further away and seemed to follow a trajectory as if it was trying to get back to the mainland. The common historical belief is either that someone went back after they were walking across the island to try to pilot the Terror to get it towards land,
It is
or
possible.
a few people stayed on the ship who there was enough food to supply for, but again, like the rest of the crew, whenever they made their voyage, they met the same fate. In 2018,
I
the
think that
Terror
seems
was
a little more
examined
likely.
beneath about 80 feet of water and seems to be, like the Erebus, in perfect condition, frozen in time under the waves.
That's crazy.
And there are still discoveries of the Franklin expedition happening to this day. Not only
That's
are they
insane.
still in the process of bringing up artifacts from the wrecked ship, but in May of 2021, one of the bodies that were
2021.
found was positively ID'd as John Gregory because his great 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 grandson living in South Africa provided a DNA sample which
What?
gave a positive ID. One of the things I love about this
That was in
story so much
21.
is despite the fact that it was over a century and a half ago, the mystery is still continuing to be unsolved and unraveled each day. Another tragic beauty of the
Sort of.
story is that in 1850, one of the ships sent to search for the Franklin expedition, known as the HMS Investigator, and yes, that was the name of it, seemed to be
Nice.
right on the path of the expedition, only they took the other route, meaning that they found the path from Europe to Asia. To which the investigator also
Oh.
got trapped in the ice and needed rescued from the Resolute, which, as I mentioned earlier, also got trapped in the ice. But that's not important. They found the path. And that path, which was later discovered as the Simpson Strait, is the one I
Hi.
mentioned earlier that perhaps the final members of the crew realized they had discovered. The captain who discovered that
Mama.
the Simpson Strait was indeed the passage from Europe to Asia agreed with the Admiralty
Wow.
that the Franklin expedition should be named as the discoverers of it. And in 1860, the British government honored Captain Franklin as being the discoverer of the passage between worlds,
Wow.
and Lady Franklin was there to accept the medal in his honor. To which they commemorated a statue of John Franklin, to which the plaque simply reads, "They forged the last link with their lives." And with that ends the
Wow.
story of the HMS
Quite the
Erebus,
plaque.
the HMS Terror, and the tragic victory of the Franklin expedition. I've always enjoyed stories of the last days of the Crusades of Adventure
Yeah, those
and
stories are
the
cool. I don't know
journeys of
why, but
man
they
and all
are.
of that. And like the ferocity and just the viciousness of nature is all around this story. And it's anyone's guess what to happen. In the series The Terror, they talk about how the polar bears could have killed them, or how lead poisoning can lead to delusions of the mind, and they could have went paranoid. And there's all sorts of manner of
I'm sure
things
there are all sorts
that
of
could have
theories
led
and
to their end.
conspiracies.
Or, as the men of the time would say, it seems like the whole world is trying to kill you whenever you're up there, and every single day is a fight for survival. But in spite of all of that, because of what they did, it led to the discovery of the passage. And in other reports that were written around the time, there were people who said it was meaningless. And by the logical sense, it was. It took that much effort to get up there. There was no way you were going to send a bunch of merchant vessels back and forth all around the year.
No.
And the Suez Canal eventually had to be invented to deal with that, and blah, blah, blah. But in their conquest for that, to put the last piece of the map together, to decide or figure out the geography of the whole world, they managed to succeed. One
In a
report, I
strange
forget
way,
who,
yeah.
I've been doing so much research about this stuff. One report said that more was discovered in the search for them than their one ship ever could have put together. And that's what I mean by the tragic victory.
That's
in
true.
the end, they accomplished what they had set out to do. And
Even if they
I
pay with
love
it
the
for their
idea
lives.
of Crozier walking 12 years for the HMS Terror.
Holy moly,
Oh,
yeah.
it's so good. It's poetry. It's poetry in the real
It
world.
sounds
And
insane.
I love it. And hopefully you at least liked it a little bit. As you can tell, I like this stuff. And hopefully you liked it too. And thank you for watching. This is, man, like, I love doing the long dives into ARGs and, you know,
I'm
horror
guessing these are all
series.
patrons.
And what else do I do? Conspiracy theories and all this stuff. But, man,
that
like,
name?
this reminds me of Chris McCandles. Or McCandless. I pronounced it wrong through that whole video. But this reminds me of stories like that. Just stories of ferocity, of people braving the wilderness. And man, I love this stuff. Anyway, I've talked about it enough. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around this long into my mad ramblings. I hope that you enjoyed. I love this stuff. I also hope that the camera setup worked out as well in this microphone. As you can, like, the Blue Yeti's back. I found a way to sync it to the camera. And I think I found a way to make the lighting quit flashing all the time. I didn't even notice it till people pointed it out. I'm awful with technology. But hopefully this was manageable. Hopefully it looks okay. I'm learning as I go. I've also been recording all night. Because I keep, like, what you don't know is all the gaffes I take in between and going over my notes and back and forth.
I know that feeling.
And I started recording around 5, 6 a.m. and it's 9 a.m. right now. I have no idea what this will cut down to. It's also funny because I planned for this to be a short video and now it's not at all.
No.
And my hair's all over the place and I'm losing my mind. So it's par for the course. But thank you guys for sticking around this long.
Man, I know that feeling.
I appreciate it. I'm trying to think if there's any announcements. Well, for one, thank you so much to my subscribers. Still over 1 million.
And of course, the
still losing
patrons
my
that
mind
are,
at
you know,
that. We're at
scrolling
like
through.
1.04, something like ridiculous. Like already another 40,000 people since 1 million.
Wow.
I love you guys. You're
Congrats
fantastic.
on 1 million, dude.
Actually,
That's
hold
awesome.
on. I need to show this on camera.
Oh.
So my girlfriend Kayla, bless her heart, threw
What
me
is
a
that?
party whenever I hit 1 million subs. But obviously there's no happy 1 million subscriber balloon at Walmart.
Right.
So she got me this.
Cue
that
the
says,
cat
Betty.
Betty.
I had to share this information with you. You're welcome.
Oh,
It is-
man.
I'm
looks
losing
like
my
looks
mind
like a
right
balloon
now.
that my sister would find hilarious.
I totally forgot what I was going to say. That cat, I was looking at the cat and it took all of my thinking away.
Oh, man.
Speaking of my girlfriend, there is a thing
not used to talking this
happening
much.
soon on the second channel. Link to that will be in the description as always. I've renamed it from Wendigames to Wendigang.
Wendigang.
Because there's
Nice.
going to be new stuff happening over there. And if I'm not going to announce it yet till all the solids are down and I can make it look pretty. But yeah, check that out in the description so you'll be the first to know when it happens. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, I'm so tired right now. Thank you so much to all of my top tier patrons that you
That's a
can see here.
lot of
And thank you to all of my
patrons.
patrons. You guys are fantastic.
Man, I
If
don't
you're
have
on the
nearly that
Patreon,
many.
you know about the announcement I made regarding the Patreon. If you are a patron and you have not seen that announcement, go do that as soon as possible. The thing that I mentioned in there is going to happen like definitively in about a week from when this video goes up. So I'm going to repost the Discord link and stuff like that. So again, like a week and then that will happen. So if you're a patron, do that ASAP, please. uh, I'm so tired. Thank you all. I've got to edit
I'd
this
say
and
go
then
to
get
bed,
it
but
out.
it's 9 a.m., so.
But thank you all so much for watching and sticking around. I love that I can do this stuff. I can go from talking about conspiracy theories to horror series, and then the stories of ships stuck in ice, and that someone is still sticking around this long watching. I hope I'm not talking by myself right now. That'd be weird. I should stop before I continue to embarrass myself.
I know that feeling, though.
Thank you guys very much. That should do it. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting to say. No, I guess not. Okay. I'm just losing my mind. Whatever. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. I really enjoyed this. I hope you did too. I hope you enjoyed. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Peace. I love how the entire last section is labeled pointless reflection, which I can understand that. I can understand why he might label it that, but I know that feeling. I know that feeling of doing the exact same freaking thing when it comes to reflections on what I've just watched or what I've just talked about. So, Wendigoon, I totally get it. That was a really good video. That had a lot of really good information. That was fascinating. Like I said, I knew little bits and pieces, but there was still a lot of information that I did not know, and it was really interesting hearing about a lot of that information, and it was interesting to see, though, I hate to say it, but it was interesting to see those graphic images that he provided a disclaimer around. But he's absolutely right. It is an unfortunate tragedy that these men, they all sacrificed their lives for, practically, whether they wanted to or not. And Franklin, in a way, did technically find the path to Asia. He is credited with doing that. In a weird way, it seemed like so much more was learned on the expedition to find that expedition than the original expedition itself. Human history, it's full of successes and it's full of failures, and some of those successes are amazing, incredible events and journeys, and some of the failures are downright tragedies that we know nothing about, except for little bits and pieces in the aftermath that still don't really tell us everything. You can't have good without having evil. You can't have evil without having good. You can't have successes without also having failures. I mean, in a strange way, without that failure, we might not have the information we do today about the Arctic, about the Simpson Strait, and whatnot. I mean, okay, that's not entirely true, but I think you get what I'm trying to go for. And it's still crazy that we have gathered a lot more information. It took a century and a half just to find the wrecks of the ships, one of which had drifted off, and the other was potentially trying to go back through its normal route, but couldn't because of environmental conditions and or lack of experience with the crew who might have been trying to man the ship. But it's crazy that it took a century and a half plus to find those wrecks. It's crazy that there's still information that is being gathered. And it sucks that the box was destroyed because that could have provided so much information. Wendigoon is right. Imagine Crozier being able to survive on the ice for 12, 13, 15, who knows how many years, just walking along the ice, probably barely surviving, maybe coming across some Inuit tribes every now and then, and, you know, seeking shelter or lessons or food or something of the sort. I mean, that's just insane. It could be not true. It could have been two other people that were actually going across the ice, and Crozier and the rest of his men could have died year 3 or 4 of the journey. But imagine if he spent well over a decade just journeying, trying to find a major settlement, trying to find his way back home, and, well, ultimately failing. Because if he would have been able to make it back home, he probably would have. And he would have recounted all the details, but what probably happened is that he tried to make it back home, and he just couldn't. There was just no, he just couldn't last out there, which is understandable. We're talking about the Arctic. This is a barren, icy, cold landscape that is almost inhospitable for almost the entirety of the year, if you think about it. And even if you are able to do some maritime fishing or, I don't know, seal hunting or something like that, that still requires expertise, supplies, skills like that the crew members, Crozier included, just might not have. I mean, it also requires a little bit of luck too. You need to, there's got to be fish around here. Are there fish around here? No fish around here? Well, let me try 100 kilometers up the shore. Any fish up here? There's this element of expertise and equipment and luck that probably just didn't add up to the right combination, and from what we know, there probably weren't any survivors, unfortunately. And they at least seemed to get through Beachy Island as normally planned, but once they reached King William Island, that's where everything just started going downhill. I mean, that's probably the best guess of what happened, at least. I'm with Wendigoon, though. I like stories like this. At the last days, or, crazy survival stories, mysteries, because there's an air of fascination and insaneness, really, with everything. Is it morbid? Yes, maybe a little bit, but it's still very fascinating in a lot of ways as well. There are just people like me and like Wendigoon who find this kind of stuff morbidly fascinating. We don't know why. We just find this stuff very interesting to hear about and research. I will say one thing though, while I love all of the additional information that Wendigoon gives us, but I think I also prefer Scary Interesting's storytelling and presentation a little bit. Not to say that Wendigoon's is bad, everybody has their preference, and I kind of like that the screen is changing every now and then, only slightly, and that there are different images every time. Scary Interesting also doesn't really use his face, whereas Wendigoon does with images every now and then. Kind of tells me a lot. It makes me think about how I need to start structuring some of my informative videos. Not the reactions and the commentary, but like my own original informative content, But I think that's really my only complaint. Again, not to say that Wendigoon's is bad at all. No, it's not. I just have my own preferences, and I still do love all of that information that I did get about this journey. It was all very fascinating stuff, and I am very happy to have watched this video. I'm glad to be getting back more to my science, my forensic roots, and, my fascination with mysteries, cold cases, and just history in general. There's a lot of really, really spooky, really interesting, really morbid, really incredible stories out there, and this is definitely one of them. And I am so glad that this one was suggested to me, because I absolutely love this. This was great. Real quick before we end it, I want to give a quick thanks to all my patrons who currently support me. You guys are awesome. Your support means the world to me. Patreon is something that I have put a lot of time and effort into, and I'm glad that there are people willing to support me and who are able to get something out of it, I hope. And I hope that continues for a while. I doubt I'm ever going to get to the number of patrons that that Wendigoon has. Holy moly, I mean, he does have 1 million subscribers, so I guess it's no surprise he's got so many patrons. That was at least a couple hundred, I think. And that's crazy. And he said those were like, the really supportive, like higher paying tiers, it sounds like. And that still blows my mind. But anyways, thank you, patrons, and again, for anybody who is not a part of Patreon or my YouTube membership program, please do consider checking it out. It would be fantastic. And hey, I don't normally say this, but go ahead and maybe give my video a like and give my channel a subscribe, and you'll get notifications about all different kinds of new videos. Gaming videos, art videos, more of this forensic history, science, commentary on all these different kinds of cool videos. especially the Let Me Know ones. People love the Let Me Know reactions that I have. They love my commentary and analysis. I'm actually very surprised. But I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your support, for, I mean, just viewing this video, even to its entirety, even towards the end. I'm having a pointless reflection now too. One last thanks for watching, and as usual, until the next video guys, chickulators.